Mental Health Symposium. We recognize a lot has happened in our community the last few months, and we hope this symposium can be an introduction to some further difficult and necessary conversations. Unfortunately, there is no quick fix, but we hope today is at least a starting point. We also want you to know that we hold space for any emotions you might feel today, and you are welcome to take a break and come back or leave if you need to. Today is about learning through others' experiences, through hard situations, as well as learning about additional resources for ourselves and for our friends and family. So thanks for being here. So I'm Mallory Johnson. I work at Eastern Idaho Public Health. I do our drug overdose prevention training, prevention program. So this is our drug overdose prevention response training. Who in here is police or sheriff's office? Police or sheriff's office. So is anyone here from fire? And EMS. Perfect. Thanks. Well, I'm excited. Thanks for being here. Who here has administered naloxone? Okay, cool. I'm going to try. I was told I had to stay close to the owl, but I want it. Try it today. So I have a couple things today. Could you hand out these packets? Okay. Yeah, you can go through. This next slide is just my grant disclaimer. This is not medical, this does not constitute as any medical advice. This is just educational information. And then you can skip through and go to the next slide. I just skip all the way through that. Like go through that one and leave it there. And then right there. Perfect. So today we're going to talk about opioids. I'm going to talk a little bit about safely storing and disposing of opioids. And then we're going to go into more of the naloxone and how to administer it, the Idaho Good Samaritan Law, the Idaho Naloxone Access Law, some of those things around it. So when we talk about opioids, when we talk about NARCAN is the opioid antagonist. So it's only going to work on an opioid overdose, which since all of you are pretty much law enforcement or EMS, this is a big refresher for most of you, so you already know this. But it's only an opioid antagonist. It's not going to work with different substances, and we'll talk about that. So when I'm talking about opioids, these are your opiates, which are your natural ones, your semi-synthetic and your synthetic. So all of these on here are things that your NARCAN will help with. Right. So two main types of opioids, besides like the breakdown, we have our prescription and then our illicitly manufactured. So with prescription opioids, it is important to realize that just because it is a prescription doesn't mean that it is 100% safe. There still are risks associated with it. And those things can be like dependence or addiction, overdose, death, pregnancy complications, sedation, respiratory depression. This chart is really helpful. It's in the packet. But there's been a lot of people, I do this training a lot, and people have told me, oh, I was given Percocet by my doctor, and I had no idea it was an opioid. I think if you don't know it's an opioid, and if you don't know what you're taking and how you're supposed to properly take it, properly store it, or properly dispose of it. So next slide. This slide shows some of the common opioids. Has anyone here ever used a drug identifier website? They're pretty cool, right? You just can type anything into Google and look at them. They're a great resource. But also I think it's important to be aware, especially when we're talking about things like our oxycodone up there. There are different illicitly manufactured pills going around in communities, and we know that it's going around in some of our communities. So it's something to be aware of. Just because it looks like a prescription that was prescribed by a doctor does not mean that it was actually prescribed by a doctor if you're buying it off the street, right? So then that kind of leads us into our illicitly manufactured opioids. Oh, our prescription fentanyl, I skipped this one, but fentanyl was created as a prescription for really severe pain. So think of cancer pain. It's a scheduled drug. It's up to 100 times more potent than morphine. You can go through that. And unfortunately, even though it was prescribed for certain reasons like this, it's made illicitly. So our illicit drugs, you can skip through and we'll go back to this one. Oh, I want to go back. So the illicit drugs, so you can skip through this one for now and then. Oh, I can go through it. Yeah. And keep going. Yep, keep going. Okay. Go to the next one. So when we talk about illicit opioids, those are things like our heroin and illicitly manufactured fentanyl. It's important to realize meth and cocaine are not opioids. So if somebody is overdosing on something like cocaine or meth, your naloxone is not going to reverse that overdose. Unfortunately, there are instances where fentanyl and fentanyl analogs are being laced into those substances, but in and of themselves, NARCAN is not going to reverse a overdose from a different substance that's not an opioid. So heroin, rapidly acting, highly addictive, the lethal dose of heroin being about 30 milligrams. And then our fentanyl is sold through illegal drug markets. These are some of the ones that look like oxycodone that you would get from your pharmacist, prescribed by a doctor, but they're pressed illicitly. And the issue with this is that, one, illicit opioids are not regulated. So I think it's part of, when you go to your pharmacist, right, they have certain parameters they have to stay in between. They can't give you something that they say is 5 milligrams and it really can be 110 milligrams. When you're buying something on the street that's illicitly manufactured and made, it's not regulated, and it's also hard to tell how much fentanyl or different substances are in one thing. So on the next slide, the lethal dose being about 2 milligrams. So I like to talk to people about, like, so imagine you have like a big bowl of flour and you put some pink glitter in it and you mix it around, you lay it out and you cut it. There's going to be some spots that have no glitter, some that have a little, maybe a little more, and some that are almost all pink glitter. So it's not regulated, you can't tell. I did just see an article, it came out at the very end of September from the Drug Enforcement Agency. It was a public safety alert, and they were talking a lot about fentanyl. And they have seized more fentanyl this year, it only being October, than the last 2 years combined. And they said that out of all the drugs that they're testing, like the fentanyl pills and things like that, 2 out of every 5 of them have enough fentanyl in them to potentially kill, meaning they have at least the lethal dose of them. So that means 2 out of every 5 that look like a prescription, right? 2 out of every 5 of these fentanyl pills have lethal dose. So really tiny, really small amounts. Who in here has heard of carfentanil? Kind of a little bit. So if you go forward 2 slides, carfentanil is a fentanyl analog. Really, it's used carfentanil is actually used to like tranquilize mammals. So if we had like a big elephant here in the room, right? That's actually what it's used for, is an animal tranquilizer. Carfentanil is 100 times more potent than fentanyl. We talked about how fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine, so it's extremely potent, and even a small amount. So we talked about like the tip of your pen being about 2 milligrams for a fentanyl lethal dose. Just imagine even less than that, and just tiny amounts of carfentanil. Unfortunately, this is something that is being laced into different substances, and so just something to be aware of. And then if you can go back to those slides. It's always important.
You gotta go right to that.
No, just back to the doctor one.
Oh.
When you are prescribed an opioid, it is important to realize that you can always talk to your doctor, right? You can actually leave it on this one. And that it's important to talk to your doctor. There are different alternative pain treatment options. So over-the-counter medications, physical therapy, acupuncture, massage, cognitive behavioral therapy. These are different things that you can always talk to your doctor about. So just kind of being aware of that. Then go forward again. Are there any questions so far on the illicit drugs or anything from the DEA that they sent out? Or counterfeit pills? Another thing, unfortunately, is Xanax. Do you guys all know what Xanax is? Xanax is used to help people with different things, whether it's sleep or anxiety. It depresses the body system, right? And mixed with fentanyl can be very risky. That's one of the issues when we talk about illicit opioids. They have different risk factors than prescription drugs, even though they still have all the same risk factors as prescriptions. They have some unique ones. Xanax is one of the pills that's being made as counterfeit fentanyl right now. An issue with that is, say somebody buys a Xanax off the street and they have a Xanax in their home and they take them together, and the one they bought off the street is laced with fentanyl, and those together is really risky. Next slide. So then this kind of goes over who's at risk. So you can go through all these. So anyone taking prescription opioids, studies show that 1 out of 4 people taking prescription opioids actually struggle with an opioid addiction. High doses of opioids, especially if you're given a high dose of opioids or a long-acting opioid right away as initial treatment. Contradictory medications, things like your Xanax, but also substances. Mixing alcohol with opioids is another risk factor. History of misusing prescription drugs in the past and the people who use heroin. So 4 out of 5 people who use heroin actually started by misusing prescription opioids. And then, so with overdose risk factors, these are a couple of things that affect it. But on this next slide, I think it's also just important to realize that not everyone's the same, right? So in this kind of bubble chart, this person would be young in age, doesn't have very good physical health, and has quite a history of substance use. And so that really affects people's tolerance, risk factor, all those things make a difference on how the opioids are going to affect them. This chart, if you click through twice, it just shows the drug overdose deaths that we had that were reported here in Idaho. So in 2018, 248, 2019, 265, 2020, 287. This also does not count, though, our non-fatal overdoses or things like this, just fatal overdoses that were recorded in the state of Idaho. So this chart just shows from 1999 to 2018, the increase of opioid overdose deaths. If you look right around 2012, 2013, there's a huge skyrocket in your synthetic opioids, but overall, these overdose deaths involving opioids are 6 times that in 2018 than they were in 1999. There's different things that you can do to properly dispose of and store your medications. This first one, timer caps, this is something you can get online. They don't have an alarm, they don't go off, and they just have to start that conversation of when they last opened it. These next ones are boxes. We have these available for free to anyone at the public health department. So if you guys want to go to the public health department, you can come to the one in Rigby, or you can go to the one in Bonneville County, or wherever it is in your county. But these are great. They have a little combination. We have medium ones, and we're working on getting some large ones, which put your prescriptions in there, trying to keep them out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Obviously, a little box can still be taken and stolen, right? But trying to cause a little bit of deterrence that people are staying out of it, especially kids. Better to put your pills in here, lock them up, than to have them out where kids can get into them. And then when we talk about disposing of prescription opioids, the best place to dispose of prescription opioids is in a drug take back location. If you can't do that, there are a couple options. So National Prescription Drug Take Back Day is October 23rd this year, and I know Chief Towers wanted to do something here in Jefferson County at the College of Eastern Idaho and Bonneville County. They do donuts for drug take back with local law enforcement and different substance use prevention agencies. What a great opportunity. But this isn't always an option for everyone, right? Some people can't go to the prescription drop box locations or to the drug take back days. And so previously, the FDA says that you can check to see if a medication is on the FDA flush list. If it is, it can be flushed. If it's not, then putting it in a bag with an unwanted substance, something like coffee ground, kitty litter, and then putting your pills in it. It's still an option, but it's not the best option. The reason is because it doesn't render that medication unusable. It's something that could be unwanted near you, may not be unwanted to somebody else, right? And if it is found, it could still be taken and it's still usable, right? And it would still have the same effects of an opioid. So what we have on this next slide, these are deterrent drug deactivation pouches. We also have these available at Eastern Idaho Public Health for free. Deterrent drug deactivation pouches are really handy. They are a great solution for getting prescription medications out of your home and doing it in your home. So all you would do is you fill it up halfway with warm water. In our medium, you can put in like 45 pills, 40 or 45 films, 6 ounces of liquid, 6 patches, whether that's fentanyl patch or something else. But you fill it up with that warm water. It has a pod inside of it, and that pod actually renders that medication unusable. So nobody could get into it and then try to use it. It's a great option, and if any of your agencies want to have it around or know of some places in the community that you think would be good, whether it's like at the senior center or places like that that you would like us to go and try to work with to get some of those out there so that we can get prescription medications properly disposed of so they're not in our community. just kind of floating. We're very happy to work with you on that. The nice thing about these is they're also non-toxic, environmentally friendly, which is great. And then safe disposal of sharps. I won't go into this too much because it's in your packet, but if you are looking to dispose sharps, we do have limited options. There is a program at Eastern Idaho Public Health, an exchange program. And then Mike's Pharmacy, which is in Bonneville County in Idaho Falls. If you have it in a sharps container, you can go and dispose of it there. However, some people don't have sharps containers, whether that's they don't know where to get them or they can't afford them or whatever the reason is. If you have a bunch of sharps laying around, this talks about how to dispose of them in your residential trash can. So that's just in your packet. Is everyone with me? I'm trying to, Kimber asked me to kind of speed it up so I can get it done on time. So I'm an East Coaster. I talk fast anyways, and I'm talking even faster. So is everyone still with me? Okay. So what is naloxone? Naloxone is a medicine that temporarily reverses an opioid overdose. Temporary only works for about 30 to 60 minutes. Okay. There are 3 different forms available. We're going to focus on these 2, your intranasal and your intramuscular. There's a third, it's called FDO. It looks like an auto injector, but the manufacturing of that was just recently discontinued. So you might see it around. Has anyone ever seen FDO before? Yeah, I figured probably not. So you might see it around, but it's pretty unlikely. So we're going to focus on these 2 ones, your intranasal and your intramuscular. So this talks about how naloxone works. So we all have opioid receptors in our brain. What happens is when somebody is using opioids and too many opioids attached to those opioid receptors, it slows them and stops them breathing. The great thing about naloxone, it actually has a stronger connection to the opioid receptors than the opioids themselves do. So when you give naloxone to somebody, the naloxone comes in and actually pushes those opioids off the opioid receptor. But it's only temporary, right? And it doesn't totally get rid of the opioids in the brain. So the opioids are still there floating around. It's not magical that makes them disappear, but it temporarily reverses it, which is a great thing. But I do think it's really important that people know that they don't just go away, especially if somebody is, they overdose or revive, and then they go back, right? And they take that same dose of whatever it was, or they use that same substance. Again, especially while they still have the naloxone in their body, as soon as that naloxone wears off, all those opioids could potentially reattach. But this just kind of talks about that connection with the naloxone and the opioid receptors and how it works. This kind of talks about who should carry naloxone. Really, I think anyone who feels like they should carry naloxone can carry it. We have the Idaho Naloxone Access Law, which makes it so that anyone can carry and administer naloxone in the state of Idaho. And then something that just happened July 1st of this year is now entities can distribute naloxone to other entities. Whereas before it had to come directly from a pharmacist or from an agency that had a pharmacist kind of sent out through him. Now entities can distribute it to other entities, which is something new. These are a couple places where you can get it. So say you're off duty and you want to have it, or you know somebody who needs it in the community, right? Or you have a friend or family member who you think naloxone is good for, whether that's because they use illicit substances or just prescription medications, right? Unfortunately, there are overdoses because people take one too many of their prescriptions, sometimes without even realizing that they took one too many. So going to your local pharmacy or your medical doctor, it's a good option. However, be aware that you might have to pay your copay or whatever it is. So this next slide talks about some of our free options that we have here in the state of Idaho. So if you're on Idaho Medicaid, you can actually take your Idaho Medicaid number and your name to the pharmacy and get naloxone for free. Idaho Harm Reduction Project, Soldiers of Hope, Center for Hope, they were doing part of that QPR training. And they also have some, and then for organizations, the Department of Health and Welfare. So for law enforcement agencies, you can get it through the Department of Health and Welfare, so that's not coming out, your budget other ways. If especially for agencies who don't have it, because they don't have the funding for it, this is a really great option. Schools, different places like that. So this is how you can get naloxone for free. Because it is a prescription, it does still have storage regulations. So the most important one in my mind is the room temperature one. Naloxone isn't something that you can just kind of leave in your trunk all year round, especially here. in Idaho, right? In the winter, it gets really cold. If it's frozen, you cannot administer it. And so it doesn't really do you any good. And so making sure that it is kept at room temperature, putting it in your go bag or your duty pack instead of leaving it in your trunk overnight, keeping it out of sunlight, keeping it out of reach of children, knowing the shelf life of it, and expiring it as needed. The new shelf life is now 3 years. It used to be 2 years, but it's now 3 years. But just kind of checking that's on the bottom of your box, as well as if you just have the NARCAN. If you have the NARCAN out of the box, you can just find the expiration date on the back of the NARCAN. They'll tell you at the bottom of it. Just so everyone is aware, say you accidentally leave it in your vehicle, right? It freezes. You can administer it, you just have to wait for it to thaw. So they say that once it thaws, you can still administer it. But with overdose situations, you don't always have 10, 15 minutes for this to thaw. You have minutes to give the NARCAN and save that person's life. And so making sure that it stays at room temperature is important. This is the Idaho Good Samaritan Law. And this one always brings up lots of different emotions. And so you guys are welcome to comment, as well as if anyone wants to talk afterwards about this, I'm happy to talk. But the intent of the Idaho Good Samaritan Law is to encourage people to call for help when there's an emergency situation such as an opioid overdose. What they don't want to happen is two people to be using a substance together and one person to overdose and the other person not to call because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble, and then there's a fatal death, right? And so what this does is it protects the caller and the person overdosing, and it gives them immunity from being charged and prosecuted for these 3 specific crimes. And these 3 specific crimes only. So possession of a controlled substance, possession of drug paraphernalia, and then being under the influence of controlled substance. However, it's important to realize there are different limitations of it. So probation or parole status could be revoked or modified. They could still be charged with other crimes, and individuals may be detained and held even though they're not charged. So the intent is really to make it so that people are calling for help, especially in an overdose situation, so that somebody isn't having a fatal overdose. But it is also important to realize the limitations, because that doesn't just mean that if they call for help, that there's nothing that they can be charged for. And some people think that, and that's not true. And so just making sure that people are aware of the limitations as well. So how to respond to an opioid overdose. The first one is assessing if there's an overdose. If you just skip to the picture. So slow heartbeat, slow regular stop breathing, unresponsive to voice or touch, pale clammy skin, blue lips or fingertips, and then pinpoint pupils. These are just a couple of the signs and symptoms of an opioid overdose. These are also signs of a lot of different medical emergencies, right? So I think it's important to realize that when in doubt, it is safe to give naloxone. If you suspect it's an overdose situation, but you're not 100% sure, or you suspect it's an overdose, but you're not sure what substance the person has used, you can give NARCAN. It's not going to cause them harm if it wasn't an opioid overdose. It just isn't going to revive them from whatever other medical emergency they may be experiencing. And then this is what we share, obviously, with you guys in the room. This one doesn't really apply, but when I teach this training to the public, making sure that precise details are given and that they speak clearly. So when you give naloxone, so our intranasal, does everyone, do your agencies, do you guys have intranasal naloxone? Yes, yes. Okay. So it's super simple and super easy to use. And I don't mean to call you out. Were you the one who said you'd administered it, or was it over here? Someone, you have? And you have? So it's pretty easy to administer, right? All you have to do, and you can click to the next one, is you peel off the back, you place it in the nose, and you press. Peel, place, press. 3 simple steps, really easy. If you have to administer a second dose, right? Because not everybody responds to a first dose, then you would just move to the next nostril. Peel, place, press. And you would just keep doing this until EMS arrives. There is no amount of naloxone that you have to stop at. So it's not like 1 dose and now I can't give another dose. You just keep giving it until your protocols tell you not to, right? and following your protocols and policies are really important. But just peel, place, press, and switching in the other nose. If somebody has jewelry in their nose, it's okay to still administer it through the nose. So you just peel, place, press, and move over to the next side after 2 to 3 minutes of signs your symptoms have not succeeded. So this is our intramuscular. Has any of you ever seen intramuscular in here? Yeah. So intramuscular, it's going to come in a vial. It'll actually have an orange little top on it. You pop it off. This one's a little bit, there's kind of a few more steps to give it, go to the next slide. But really, it's just drawing out the whole entire vial. 1 vial of intramuscular naloxone is the full dose. So you draw out the whole entire vial, and then you administer at a 90-degree angle into a muscular area. So someplace like the shoulders, the thighs, the butt, someplace like that. Yep. And then the next one is rescue breath. And the rescue breaths really do depend on your agency's policies, right? So if your agency has the policy to not give rescue breaths and you're at work, then you would follow your policy. If you do give rescue breaths, we have something in the entire packet that goes through step-by-step of how to give rescue breaths. But really, it's just important that the person is breathing, that they're getting proper oxygen to their brain. I'm not getting any other issues from that. So we give them naloxone, you make sure that the person's breathing, and then after that, you put them in the recovery position. Just put through all this to the recovery position. Through all these numbers. So the recovery position is just putting the person on their side. So this would be so that if they vomit, they don't then choke on it. Yep, and aspirate. Yep, exactly. So you put the person on their side, tells you exactly how to do this. Say you've administered 1 dose of the NARCAN, the intranasal, you put the person's breathing, you put them in the recovery position, and then signs and symptoms of the overdose come back, and you have to administer another dose of naloxone. If it was safe, you would just move them back onto their back, administer it, make sure they're breathing, put them back into the recovery position. And then staying with them till EMS arrives. On this slide, it talks about some signs and symptoms of acute opioid withdrawal. It's different for each person, right? But it's important to realize that NARCAN takes away those high euphoric feelings. So when somebody is given naloxone or NARCAN, and they can come out and be really combative, they can be confused, they can be upset, they could be nauseous, all different signs and symptoms. I've heard of times where their nose may bleed a little bit. This is just for you guys to be aware that there are different signs and symptoms of acute opioid withdrawal. And if somebody experiences one of these, then you might just know that it is acute opioid withdrawal, right? These are a couple of COVID-19 considerations. So using your proper protective equipment, distancing yourself, this is a great idea anyways, especially if the person has become combative. And then washing your hands. It's always best to wash your hands with soap and water. I did read an article a couple months ago that was talking about the safety, especially when it comes to our illicitly manufactured drugs, that when if you don't have proper gloves on, proper protective equipment, and you have cuts or things like that onto your hand, you use the alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Alcohol can drive it into your skin. So it's important if you're not wearing gloves, which you should try to wear, then make sure you're washing your hands with soap and water and not just using alcohol-based hand sanitizer, which we've all gotten pretty accustomed to using right now. And then opioid use disorder. So you can skip through this one to the next slide, go through this. Yeah. So I'll go back. So it's important to realize opioid use disorder is a medical diagnosis. Diabetes is a diagnosis. Diabetes damages the pancreas. Opioid use disorder does actually cause damage to the brain. It is something that has to be diagnosed by a doctor, but less than 1 in 10 people with substance use disorders receive any treatment. And part of that is to do with the stigma. So there's a lot of stigma around people who suffer with the opioid use disorder. And I think that there's a lot of times this picture in our head, especially with a lot of the people, as you're in law enforcement and fire and EMS, a lot of the people that you work with who have experienced an opioid overdose might be not the same type of people, right, that somebody else might know as a friend or a family member who has it and is covering it up. And so I just think it's important to be aware of the way that we talk and things like that. So our words do matter. So this slide kind of talks about some of the ways, the words that we can say, and then the next one is your person first language. So putting the person before the diagnosis. So things like a person in recovery instead of a former addict. And in our recovery community, they told us that these words really do make a difference for them. Then resources. We have lots of different resources. One of these is QR codes. These can be found on the table out there. This QR code links to all different things. So substance use recovery, mental and behavioral health, but also financial and food assistance. It links to housing, different safe and sober housing. It links to education opportunities. So if you guys want to have any of these in your agency, you're welcome to take any of those materials out there, as well as we have links that we can bring. Let's skip to the next one. We do have different medication-assisted treatment providers in our area. Most of them are down in Bonneville County, but these are providers that provide things like Suboxone or buprenorphine for somebody who has an opioid use disorder. And then here in Jefferson County, these are prescription drug take-back locations, as well as the pharmacies that carry naloxone. So like when I said that you can go into your pharmacy and you can have your pharmacist write your script, or if you have Idaho Medicaid, you can go in and get it. These would be your pharmacies, and they have confirmed that they do have naloxone. Then these next ones are just kind of the other counties surrounding, just in case you're in another county. You can see where the drug take-backs are and where the pharmacies are in your area. So you can skip through these ones today. Then the last slide is just the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's a great number to have in your phone. And are there any questions? We went through that kind of fast. No?
Is there a minimum age to administer it to?
No, that's a great question. No, but it's important to realize when you have like an infant, that's a lot more of a crisis situation, and they can have more withdrawal symptoms. So it's more serious than like threatening if you were to administer naloxone. The naloxone could be given to say you have an 8-year-old or somebody who's gotten into mom or dad's opioids. You can't still administer naloxone, but just know the younger they are, the smaller, and the more of an emergency situation that is, the more life-threatening it can be because they're so small. But
toddlers be responding to the mom or dad's.
yeah, and it happens, unfortunately, right? People don't walk them up, and a lot of pills with like candy. So, yeah, but you can still give it, but it is more life-threatening if they're little. Great question. Any other questions? So do you want to go, is our little, I have a survey, so I'll have Danae come around and do the survey, but we do have about 10 minutes, and so, yep, I'll do this. I have a game. So who in here knows how to play Jeopardy? Pretty much everyone. My Jeopardy is a little different. You don't have to answer in what is, right? And anyone can answer at any time. But we'll kind of go through this. Do you want to pick out some categories? For which one? For 100. Okay, what are the 3 classes of opioids? You guys also all have packets in front of you. Great little cheat sheets. Huh? Yeah, you're allowed to. All your resources, right? That your natural, which is your opiate. Your synthetic, and your semi-synthetic. So those are your 3 different classes. Perfect. Okay. Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying, and I apologize. I know you could be really funny. Right next to you. Do you want to pick one? For what amount? 200. What do you add to the terror bags activism? Water. Yeah. And making sure that it's warm helps to deactivate them a lot faster. Which one would you like? We did resources for 200, 100, and 300. 300. Name one organization that provides naloxone for free. Yep. The Department of Health and Welfare. Yeah, correct. And when you pick, you don't have to be the only answer. You don't have to pick your one.
Recognizing spawn.
For 100. When I do this with youth, they always like it like the 300 like not. And you guys are like, hey, name one sign of overdose. 10-point pupils. Yep. Okay, this is what's a black cookie. Right, sorry, I don't know. You have to- So that one we just did 100, but we have 2 and 300 on recognized response. So when should a second dose of naloxone be administered? Yeah, 2 to 3 minutes after you do the first one, the signs and symptoms are still there. Okay. Active carotid breath, 2. Yeah, or put them in the recovery position. I'm going to stop there since we only have 5 minutes left. And then I just do want to show you, this is something that we're working on. We will have these in the schools. Here's your Jefferson County School District is putting these up. But these are things that we are getting all around the community. They're overdose rescue kits. They have the signs and symptoms on the front of an opioid overdose. On the inside, it has a CPR mask, a packet that talks about how to give NARCAN, and we're working with individuals to get the NARCAN from the Department of Health and Welfare to put in there. So I have talked with Chief Tower on some places that he has ideas for where these should be put. If anyone else has any ideas, I would be more than happy to answer them. For places that are outside of our health district, you can get kits. They look a little different than this, but the Department of Health and Welfare will provide overdose rescue kits. And then the Department of Health and Welfare also has little blue overdose rescue kit bags. So maybe you want a bag for a go bag or something like that, and you don't necessarily want a box, you can get a bag. And they do also have carry cases. That's something that I've been asked about quite a bit by law enforcement, is if I could provide them. The Department of Health and Welfare does have something you can go on to their thing. If you're interested, come see me afterwards and I'll get you a link. I'd be happy to get you their link to just send it in, but anyone from the state of Idaho. So I think you're in Bonner County, is that right? So you guys, even though you can have these boxes, because these ones are within the health district, there's these little red ones you can order, and you can still order the overdose rescue kits. You can order intramuscular and intranasal, and then the little tiny carry cases can also be ordered from there, all for free through the Department of Health and Welfare. So I'm happy to help anyone with those links if they need them. But thank you for coming to this one. You can leave your evaluation surveys on the table. And then if you have any questions, you want to talk, I'd be more than happy to answer any of them.